At my mother's birthday dinner, she opened her gift from me, but instead of thanking me, she burst into tears and ran out of the room. Later that night, I found out the present I gave her wasn't what I thought. It was a hidden box my father had left for me years ago that someone switched without telling me. I was texting Sarah while my wife Emma was in the shower, telling her how beautiful she looked at lunch, when I heard the water stop. I had maybe 30 seconds to delete the conversation and pretend I was checking work emails. That's who I'd become, a man who measured his in stolen moments and covered tracks. It started 6 months ago. Emma was working late again. Our conversations had turned into logistics about bills and grocery lists, and Sarah from accounting started staying after hours too. Just friendly conversation at first, then coffee, then lunch, then hands touching across the table when she laughed at my jokes. The way Emma used to before we got comfortable and stopped trying. I told it was harmless. I told I deserved to feel wanted again. I told a lot of lies while I was falling into Sarah's bed 3 times a week, lying to Emma about client meetings and overtime that didn't exist. The worst part, I was good at it. Years of marriage had taught me Emma's patterns, her moods, when she'd be too tired to ask questions. I knew exactly which lies would slide past without inspection. I'd become a professional deceiver in my own home. My mother's 70th birthday was coming, and I'd completely forgotten until Emma reminded me 2 days before. Panic set in. Mom had been dropping hints about wanting something meaningful for months, and I had nothing. Emma suggested I look through the garage for something sentimental, maybe frame an old photo or find one of Dad's things to repurpose into something special. That's when I found the wooden box. It was tucked behind Christmas decorations I'd forgotten we had, wrapped in one of Dad's old shirts. The box was beautiful, hand-carved mahogany with brass hinges, the kind of craftsmanship don't see anymore. It felt substantial, important. I figured Dad had made it for Mom years ago, maybe as an anniversary gift she'd forgotten about and stored away. Perfect. I could present it as a rediscovered treasure, something meaningful from Dad's memory. It would buy me emotional points with Mom and prove to Emma that I still cared about family, even while I was betraying ours every chance I got. I wrapped it carefully, wrote a card about how Dad would have wanted Mom to have this special piece he'd made just for her. I even rehearsed the speech in my car, perfecting the right amount of emotion in my voice. I was always performing now, always calculating the right response to maintain my cover. The birthday dinner was at Mom's house. Emma had made her famous lasagna, my sister brought flowers. Everyone was trying to make it feel celebratory despite the empty chair where Dad used to sit. Mom seemed happy, laughing at my brother's terrible jokes, complimenting Emma's cooking. For a moment I almost forgot about the double I was living. Then came time for gifts. Mom opened Emma's present first, a beautiful scarf she'd been admiring at the mall. Then my sister's photo album of family memories. When she got to mine, her face lit with anticipation. I gave my prepared speech about finding something special Dad had left behind, something made with love just for her. She untied the ribbon carefully, the way she always did, saving every piece of wrapping paper for reuse. When she lifted the box lid, her smile vanished instantly. Her face went white, then red, then crumpled into something I'd never seen before. Pure, devastating shock mixed with what looked like betrayal. She stared into the box for maybe 10 seconds that felt like hours. Then she looked at me with eyes I'll never forget, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "How could give me this?" Before I could ask what was wrong, she clutched the box to her chest and ran out of the room. We heard her bedroom door slam, then muffled sobbing that made everyone freeze at the table. Emma looked at me like I'd slapped an elderly woman in public. My sister went after Mom while my brother and Emma started cleaning in the awkward silence. I sat there staring at the empty chair where Mom had been, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. The box had looked innocent enough when I'd grabbed it. What could possibly be inside that would cause that reaction? 3 hours later, after we'd given trying to coax Mom out of her room and driven home in silence, Emma finally spoke. She called me, she said, not looking at me as she hung her coat. She wanted to explain what happened tonight. I was still confused, still thinking maybe there was some misunderstanding I could smooth over. What did she say? Emma turned to face me, and I saw something in her expression that made my stomach drop. Not anger exactly, but something colder. Disappointment mixed with a kind of clarity that terrified me. That box wasn't from Father. It was from Father to college graduation gift that he never got to give because he died 2 weeks before the ceremony. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the emotion underneath. It had acceptance letter to graduate school inside, the one never opened after he died. And his wedding ring, and a letter he wrote about being proud of the man become. The room started spinning. I remembered Dad mentioning a special graduation gift, something he was excited to give me. After he died, I'd been too destroyed to think about presents or ceremonies or anything that reminded me of him. Mom must have saved the box, waiting for the right moment to give it to me. She's been holding on to it for 8 years, Emma continued, waiting for a time when seemed stable enough to handle opening it. When weren't drowning in grief anymore. She thought maybe wedding day, or when we had kids, or some other milestone when be ready to read Father's last words to his son. I sank into our kitchen chair, the weight of what I'd done crushing down on me. I'd taken the most precious gift my dead father had prepared for me and casually gifted it to make look thoughtful. I'd turned a sacred moment between father and son into a thoughtless gesture born from my own negligence. But Emma wasn't done. She also asked me something strange, she said, pulling out her phone. She wanted to know why Sarah Hendricks from office called the house last week looking for, and why she seemed surprised when I answered, "My turn to ice water." Emma held her phone screen, showing a text message chain I'd never seen before. Apparently little girlfriend got confused about which number was work phone and which was our home line. She sent some very interesting messages to our landline voicemail when didn't answer cell. The messages were all there. Sarah asking when I'd be free tonight. Sarah saying she missed me. Sarah complaining that these sneaking around games were getting old and when was I gonna leave my wife like I'd promised. I'd never promised that. Or had I? In the heat of the moment, in the intoxication of new attraction, what exactly had I said? What future had I painted for Sarah to keep her interested, to keep her available for my selfish needs? 8 years, Emma said quietly. We've been together 8 years, married for 4. We've built a hole together, and it away for what? Someone younger who laughs at jokes. I wanted to defend, to explain how lonely I'd been, how taken for granted I'd felt. But sitting there looking at my wife's face, seeing the pain I'd caused my mother on her birthday, knowing I'd desecrated my father's final gift to his son, all my justifications crumbled into ash. I think should stay at brother's tonight, Emma said. I need time to think about what comes next. I packed a bag while she sat in the living room, not crying, just staring at the wall where our wedding photos used to make her smile. Before I left, I tried to apologize, to explain, to somehow make sense of what I'd done. She looked at me with eyes that had loved me for 8 years and said, "Don't, just don't, I've done enough damage for one day." As I drove to my brother's house with a suitcase in my back seat and my marriage crumbling in my rear view mirror, I realized I'd managed to destroy 3 relationships in one evening. My mother would never look at me the same way again. My wife was deciding whether our marriage was worth saving, and my father's final gift to his son had been turned into the weapon that exposed what I'd become. I'd spent 6 months thinking I was smart enough to have it all. Instead, I'd lost everything that actually mattered while chasing something that was just an escape from my own emptiness. The man my father had been proud of was gone, replaced by someone who would steal from the dead to cover his own laziness and betrayal. I spent that first night at my brother's place staring at his ceiling, trying to figure out how to fix this. Mark had set the couch for me without asking questions, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes when I gave him the basics. Wife needs space. Made some mistakes, need a few days to sort things out. By morning I'd convinced this was salvageable. Affairs happen, people work through them. Emma and I had 8 years of history, that had to count for something. I'd end things with Sarah, go to counseling, whatever it took. I'd prove I was still the man Emma married. I was delusional. I called in sick to work and drove to Mom's house around noon. She answered the door but didn't invite me in, just stood there in her bathrobe looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. I need to explain about the box, I started, but she held her hand. I gave that box to Emma this morning, she said quietly. Along with Father's letter. She brought me coffee and we talked for 2 hours about who've become. My stomach dropped. Mom, don't understand. I didn't know what was in the box. I was just trying to find something meaningful. That's exactly the problem. Her voice had a flatness I'd never heard before. We're trying to something meaningful, because couldn't be bothered to create something real. Just like I've been faking marriage while running around with that woman. The way she said that woman made my skin crawl. How much had Emma told her? Father worked on that letter for weeks before he died. He was so proud of, so excited about the man we're becoming. He wrote about integrity, about honoring the people who love, about being the kind of husband and father he tried to be. Mom's eyes filled with tears. If he could see what done to Emma, to our family, it would break his heart all over again. I tried to reach for her, but she stepped back. I need to leave, she said. I can't look at right now without seeing him, and are not worthy of that comparison anymore. She closed the door in my face. My own mother, the woman who'd defended me through every mistake of my childhood, had just written me off. I sat in my car outside her house for an hour, calling Emma over and over, straight to voicemail every time. Finally I drove home to get some clothes and try to talk to her face to face. The house was empty, but Emma had left Dad's letter on the kitchen table. Reading it destroyed me. He'd written about how proud he was of the young man I'd become, how he couldn't wait to see me build it with someone special. He talked about the kind of husband he hoped I'd be, patient and faithful and strong. He'd included his wedding ring and asked me to wear it when I found the right woman, to remember that love was a choice make every day, not a feeling that comes and goes. The man in that letter was everything I'd stopped being. The man he'd believed I could become was exactly who I'd betrayed. Emma came home around 6 with red eyes and 2 of her girlfriends flanking her like bodyguards. They glared at me while she packed a suitcase, clearly there to make sure I didn't try to manipulate or pressure her. "Where are going?" I asked. "Somewhere, won't find me until I decide what I want to do," she said without looking from folding her clothes. "I've called a lawyer, not to file anything yet, just to understand my options." The word lawyer hit me like a physical. This was really happening. My wife was preparing to divorce me. "Emma, please, we can work through this. People make mistakes. We can go to counseling, I'll do whatever want." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were completely empty of the warmth that had been there just 2 days ago. Didn't make a mistake, David. Made hundreds of deliberate choices over 6 months. Every lie, every secret meeting, every time came home and pretended to be my husband while we're thinking about her. One of her friends, Jessica, couldn't stay quiet anymore. Brought her to the company Christmas party. We all met her. We liked her. The whole time we're introducing girlfriend to wife's friends. I'd forgotten about that. Sarah had come as my +1 from the office and Emma had been sick with flu. I'd introduced Sarah around as a colleague, watched her charm everyone while internally congratulating on how smooth I was being. Now I realized how that must be for Emma. All her friends had unknowingly shaken hands with the woman who was destroying her marriage. The whole office knows. Emma continued packing. Sarah apparently wasn't as discreet as thought. Jenny from HR called me this morning to let me know there's going to be an investigation. Inappropriate workplace relationships, especially between management and subordinates, are against company policy. Management and subordinates. I'd never thought of it that way, but I was Sarah's supervisor. The power dynamic made everything worse, more sordid. I could lose my job on top of everything else. "I need the credit cards," Emma said, holding out her hand. "And I'm taking half of our savings. My lawyer says that's fair." I handed over my wallet like a scolded child. Emma's friend took pictures of me doing it, probably for evidence in divorce proceedings I couldn't believe were actually happening. After they left, I sat in our empty house surrounded by 8 years of shared wedding photos on the mantle, furniture we'd picked out together, the coffee maker I'd bought Emma for our anniversary because she hated the old one. Everything looked the same, but it all felt like evidence of I'd thoughtlessly destroyed. I called Sarah. Thank God, she answered on the first ring I've been trying to reach all day. Jenny from HR wants to meet with both of us tomorrow morning. I think someone reported us. My wife knows, I said simply. Silence on the other end. Then, what does that mean for us? We're us. Like we were a real couple instead of a 6-month betrayal that was about to cost me everything that mattered. There is no us, Sarah. There never really was. I'm married, and I'm about to lose my wife because of what we've been doing. But said weren't happy with her. Said we're thinking about leaving. Had I said that? Probably. When are lying to everyone, including say whatever keeps the fantasy going. Paint marriage is more broken than it is to justify breaking it further. I was lying. To Emma. I destroyed my marriage for what? For an attention and the thrill of getting away with something. Sarah's voice turned cold. So I was just what practice? A midlife crisis. Or going to throw me away now that got caught. She wasn't wrong to be angry. I'd made her complicit in something without being honest about what it would cost. But her anger felt like another weight on my chest instead of something I could fix. I'm sorry, I said and hung. That night I sat in our living room reading Dad's letter over and over, wearing his wedding ring on the wrong hand because I didn't deserve to wear it the right way. He'd raised me better than this. Emma had loved me better than this. I'd had everything a man could want, and I'd traded it for the temporary high of feeling wanted by someone new. The next morning, HR fired me, not for the affair specifically, but for conduct unbecoming, and, of professional boundaries. Sarah kept her job but got transferred to another department. I cleared out my desk while former colleagues avoided eye contact, everyone knowing exactly why I was leaving. Emma's lawyer called that afternoon. She wanted to file for separation, with the option to convert to divorce after the mandatory waiting period. I could stay in the house but she wanted me to buy out her half of the mortgage within 6 months. She was keeping her car, half our savings, and most of our friends. I was losing my job, my wife, my home, my social circle, and my relationship with my mother. All for 6 months of sneaking around with a woman who I realized I didn't even particularly like when she wasn't validating my ego. That evening, I drove past the restaurant where Sarah and I used to meet for lunch. Through the window, I could see her sitting at our usual table with some guy from her new department, laughing at his jokes the same way she used to laugh at mine. It took me 6 months to destroy I'd spent 8 years building. It would take Sarah about 6 days to replace me. The man my father wrote about in that letter would have fought for his marriage, would have chosen love over temptation, would have been worthy of Emma's trust and my mother's respect. Instead I'd become someone who stole from the dead and lied to the living, who away real love for the cheap imitation of it. Sitting in that empty house, wearing my father's ring on the wrong hand while my wife planned our divorce, I finally understood the difference between the man I was supposed to be and the man I'd chosen to become. The choice had been mine every step of the way, and now I had to live with all of them. 6 months after that birthday dinner, I was living in a studio apartment that smelled like the previous tenant's cigarettes and learning what real loneliness felt like. The divorce was final, the house was sold, and I'd managed to throw most of my savings on legal fees and deposits for my new as a single man approaching 40. Emma had moved across the country for a job opportunity that suspiciously opened right after our marriage ended. I suspected her friend Jessica had connections there, helping her escape the scene of our imploded together. Smart move. If I could have run from, I would have. My mother still wasn't speaking to me. Mark said she asked about me sometimes, but in the way might ask about a distant relative with terminal illness, concerned but detached, like I was already dead to her. Every family gathering happened without me now. Birthday dinners, holiday celebrations, Sunday barbecues. I'd been edited out of the family narrative. The job search was brutal. My old industry was small enough that word traveled fast, and nobody wants to hire the guy who got fired for sleeping with his subordinate. I finally found work at a smaller company for 30% less pay, doing basically the same job with none of the respect or advancement opportunities. Sarah had gotten engaged to the guy from her new department. I found out through mutual friends who seemed to take pleasure in updating me on her happiness, like proof that our affair had been as meaningless to her as it should have been to me. They were planning a winter wedding, the kind of wedding Emma and I had talked about having again for our 10-year anniversary, renewing our vows in front of family and friends. That would never happen now. I started therapy, partly because I knew I needed help and partly because the loneliness was driving me insane. Durster, Martinez was patient but relentless in making me face exactly what I'd done and why. Keep talking about the affair like it happened to, she observed during one session. Like we're the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of them. She was right. I'd spent months telling I was driven to cheat by Emma's work schedule, by our routine becoming boring, by feeling unappreciated. But sitting in that office, paying someone to listen to my problems because I'd systematically destroyed every relationship that mattered. I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. I cheated because I wanted to. Because the excitement of secret texts and stolen afternoons made me feel young and desirable and alive in ways that real, committed love never could. Marriage is daily choice, as my father had written. Cheating is daily selfishness masquerading as romance. What would say to father now, if could talk to him? Dr. Martinez asked. I broke down completely. Right there in her office, crying like I hadn't since his funeral. Because I knew exactly what I'd say, and I knew I'd never get the chance. I'd tell him I was sorry. That I'd read his letter about integrity and honor and becoming a good husband, and I'd failed at every single thing he'd hoped I'd become. That I'd taken his wedding ring, the symbol of his 40-year marriage to my mother, and worn it while I was lying to my own wife. That the man he'd raised had turned into someone he would have been ashamed to call his son. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I'd probably been depressed for months before the affair started, that I'd used Sarah as an antidepressant instead of dealing with my actual problems. But understanding it didn't undo it. Emma was still gone. My mother still couldn't look at me. My father's faith in the man I could become had been proven catastrophically wrong. The worst part was the ripple effects I hadn't anticipated. Emma's younger sister stopped talking to me, which meant I lost contact with her kids, who I'd watched grow and loved like they were my own. Emma's parents, who'd welcomed me into their family for 8 years, now treated me like I was radioactive. Even mutual friends had to choose sides, and most of them chose the woman who'd been betrayed over the man who'd done the betraying. I became the cautionary tale people told at dinner parties. Remember David, Emma's ex-husband, away 8 years of marriage for some girl from work. Can't imagine. One night, about a year after everything fell apart, I was grocery shopping when I saw Emma in the frozen food aisle. She looked incredible. Happier, more confident, like she'd remembered who she was before she'd tied her to mine. She was with someone. A tall guy with kind eyes who was making her laugh while they debated ice cream flavors. I hid behind the cereal display and watched them for 5 minutes, seeing how naturally he touched her arm, how genuinely she smiled at his jokes. This was what love looked like when it wasn't being poisoned by lies and betrayal. This was what I'd thrown away to feel important for a few months. They walked past my hiding spot on their way to checkout. Emma saw me and our eyes met for maybe 3 seconds. No anger there anymore, no pain, just a kind of distant recognition, like might acknowledge a former coworker had forgotten knew. That worse than if she'd screamed at me. I was a footnote in her story now. A mistake she'd moved past. The man who'd been the center of her world for 8 years had been replaced by someone who made her laugh in grocery stores, and she was clearly better off for it. I spent that night drinking alone in my studio apartment, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Our wedding day, vacations, Christmas mornings. Emma always looked happiest in the candid shots, when she didn't know I was taking pictures. Pure joy on her face because she thought she'd found her person, her partner for. I'd been that person once. For real, not just pretending. In the early years, I'd been the man who brought her coffee in bed, who listened to her work problems, who held her when her grandmother died. I'd been worthy of her love then. But somewhere along the way, I'd started taking it for granted. Started thinking I deserved credit just for showing, just for not being actively terrible. I'd stopped trying to earn her smile and started resenting that she didn't give it freely anymore. The affair wasn't about Sarah at all. It was about me being too lazy and selfish to do the work of loving Emma through the ordinary, difficult, beautiful process of building it together. It was about choosing the easy high of new attraction over the harder satisfaction of deepening existing love. Sarah had been right that day she got angry at me on the phone. I had used her as practice for a midlife crisis I was too cowardly to face directly. But Emma had been right too. I hadn't made a mistake. I'd made hundreds of choices day after day, to prioritize my own temporary happiness over everything and everyone that actually mattered. My father's letter sat on my nightstand now, in the wooden box that had started this whole catastrophe. I read it sometimes when the loneliness got too heavy, trying to remember what it felt like to be the kind of man someone could be proud of. But mostly it just reminded me of how far I'd fallen from who I was supposed to become. 2 years later I heard through Mark that Emma had gotten married. Not to the guy from the grocery store, but to someone she'd met at her new job. A doctor who worked with refugees, someone who spent his actually helping people instead of just talking about it. They were expecting their first child. Emma was going to be a mother. The woman I'd shared 8 years with, who'd wanted kids with me, who'd talked about names and nursery colors and what kind of parents we'd be, was creating that with someone else. Because I'd chosen 6 months of meaningless excitement over a lifetime of real love. I thought about reaching out to congratulate her, then realized how pathetic that would sound. The man who destroyed her faith in marriage congratulating her on finding someone trustworthy enough to start a family with. She didn't need my approval or acknowledgement. She'd built something beautiful from the ashes I'd left behind. That night, I took off my father's wedding ring and put it back in the wooden box. I wasn't worthy to wear it, had never been worthy since the day I'd started lying to my wife. It belonged with his letter, in that space between who I was supposed to be and who I'd chosen to become. I sit here now, 3 years later, in the same studio apartment with the same cigarette smell, writing this story as a warning to any man who thinks he's smart enough to have it all. Or not clever enough to manage 2 women, not special enough to deserve more than one person's love, not entitled to excitement at the expense of honor. The temporary high of being desired by someone new will cost everything permanent and real in wife's trust, family's respect, children's inheritance of what love looks like. I'll trade decades of genuine partnership for months of artificial passion, and I'll spend the rest of the knowing had something irreplaceable and destroyed it because we're bored. Emma's child will grow with a father who chose her mother every day, who never made her question whether love was real or reliable. That could have been my legacy, should have been my gift to the future. Instead, I'm the ghost at the feast, the cautionary tale, the man who had everything and traded it for nothing. Father's pride, mother's respect, wife's love, children's future, only get to lose these things once, and some mistakes don't get second chances.